Yeah, I genuinely do not know how to begin this episode. Oh my gosh. How's it going, y'all? My name is Eric, and welcome to Out of the Groove. We have so much to get to. This is going to be much more than your average Out of the Groove race review. We have so many stories to cover. We're going to talk about Chase Elliott, who I believe just experienced his greatest moment since he got into NASCAR. We are going to talk about Kevin Harvick and the disastrous Martinsville race that the 4 team just had. We're going to talk about other playoff drivers like Denny Hamlin, Brad Keselowski, Martin Truex Jr., who made their presences felt today. For some, it worked out better than others. We're going to talk about the controversy around the NASCAR playoff format. We're going to cover pretty much everything throughout this video, but first we do have to thank a very fun new sponsor of Out of the Groove. It's officially November, which means some of you probably have already started putting the Christmas tree up. We've still got the Halloween stuff up for one more day at least, but now that the holidays are pretty much upon us, my friends at Madari Toys have a new product, a NASCAR version of their Madari Mix and Match building set. They sent me this special edition to try out for myself and show all of you. Madari is the ultimate toy car with all sorts of different ways to mix and match and customize your car. You'll never run out of exciting combinations to use. As you can see, the NASCAR track set comes with easy to put together NASCAR track pieces that can be arranged into multiple different ways, as well as some fun props and some stickers for further customization. Super easy to put together, very fun to use. Like it says on the box, create your own NASCAR race. To experience the NASCAR track pack for yourself, head to shop.modari.com, or it's also available on Amazon. Those links are down in the description below. But yeah, really fun to play with, really fun to put together and mess with some different combinations. Thank you to Madari Toys for sending me the NASCAR track pack and for sponsoring this episode of Out of the Groove. All right, but the real fun and games are gonna have to wait. We have so much to get to in this episode. We'll have plenty of time to talk about the playoffs and talk more about Kevin Harvick's season, but I want to start this episode by giving Chase Elliott his due. Chase Elliott has arrived. He is officially, if he wasn't already, he is officially a NASCAR superstar. This is his greatest moment since he's been in NASCAR, whether it be Trucks, Xfinity, or Cup. This is it. The same track where just a few years ago, his championship 4 hopes were dashed dramatically when Denny Hamlin spun him out. Chase Elliott came into today's race in a must-win scenario. He had to win the Xfinity 500 today if he wanted to race for a championship. He's run well at Martinsville in the past, but had never gotten a win in the Cup Series to this point. I even mentioned his father, Bill Elliott, of course. As great as he was, he also never won at Martinsville in the Cup Series. So it was going to take a superb performance for Chase Elliott and that team to make the championship 4 at the end of today's race. And to pile on, Chase Elliott late in this race was consistently put behind the 8 ball by his own pit crew. Back-to-back pit stops late in stage 3. The first one, his jackman was over the wall too soon. Now he did catch it, and he actually went back and reset a rule that nobody really knew about. Bob Hockers pointed out on Twitter that it is a rule in the NASCAR book, so credit to the jackman for reading ahead. But still, it turned into a slow pit stop that cost Chase Elliott the lead. Then on the very next pit stop, trouble on the left rear cost Chase Elliott several spots. He ended up restarting 10th with less than 100 laps to go at Martinsville. Time goes quick at Martinsville, and it is a difficult track to pass at, but Chase Elliott put the team on his back, carried the weight of that entire Hendrick Motorsports organization, the entire Chevrolet manufacturer, and he willed that number 9 car through the top 10 to the race lead. He won this race by like 6 seconds to give Chevrolet their first championship 4 appearance since 2016. Chase Elliott arrived today. This was his greatest moment since getting into the NASCAR Cup Series. In the last year or so, he's had some pretty big moments. Last year's Roval race was pretty darn impressive. That might have been a more impressive drive, but given all that was on the line today, all the pressure put on him, all the issues his team had on pit road late in this race, I'm not talking stage 1 or stage 2, less than 100 laps to go, he was restarting 10th. For Chase Elliott to will the team to victory lane, he deserves, I don't want to give him all the credit. Alan Gustafson called it a good race. The pit crew did have a great pit stop with like 50 laps to go when it mattered most. They held his track position at least the third time's the charm, but Chase Elliott was the champion today of that race team. He was their leader. He emerged as the superstar everyone knows he is and can be. And so Chase Elliott, round of applause, because it didn't get talked about as much as it should have because of all the other shenanigans we're going to get to at the end of this race. But Chase Elliott was the star of the show today. Congratulations to Chase Elliott and Chevrolet and Hendrick Motorsports for getting into the championship 4 at Phoenix next weekend. He's going to be a real threat to win next week. Do not count Chase Elliott out, but I was extremely impressed. We almost even saw a shred of emotion from Chase Elliott during his post-race interview on the front stretch. We almost saw him maybe shed a tear. I feel like maybe one of his eyes looked a little watery. Maybe, no, he he was about as deadpan as ever. But still, Chase Elliott, of course, NASCAR's most popular driver on paper at least. It's great to see the results start pouring in. This was a superb driving performance from Chase Elliott, so credit to him. He deserves all the credit in the world. Just wanted to get that out of the way first. Now, before we talk in more detail about some of the playoff contenders, let's look at the top 20 finishing results. Behind Chase Elliott, it was a Penske parade. As the track got a little cooler, as it got darker in Martinsville, it looked like the Penske cars came to life. Great run for Joey Logano, who's already locked into Phoenix next week. Ryan Blaney, who's not in the playoffs anymore. Great run for him. Brad Keselowski, who sped on pit road late in this race, was also able to march through the field, much like Chase Elliott. He was able to get all the way back up to fourth, which was extremely important. We'll talk about more in a second. Credit to Kurt Busch and Alex Bowman, two other playoff drivers who came into today long shots to make it to the championship four. They were both virtually in must-win situations. Neither driver was really thought of as a favorite to win today. Both drivers ran up in the top 5 for a large portion of the race. Both ended up in the top 6 at the end of the race. I want to give Alex Bowman and Kurt Busch a shout out for not going away quietly. They made their presence known tonight. Denny Hamlin, who's not had a very strong playoffs to this point, limps home 11th, and I do say limps. Early in this race, Hamlin had a top 5 car, even led some laps, looked like he was very much going to be in contention for the win, along with guys like Chase Elliott, Martin Truex Jr. Midway through the race, during a caution, he had to pit twice to tighten the lug nuts on one of his wheels. That put Hamlin back in the pack, and he gingerly made his way forward as the race progressed, got up into the top 10, top 5 again late, but then faded. He said in his post-race, again, once it got to night, the 11 car just went away, and he barely held on for that 11th place finish, which was an extremely important position. Not pictured, but finishing 22nd, Martin Truex Jr. led laps in this race, had a really fast car, was running second late in this thing when he pit with a loose wheel, fell multiple laps down, ends up finishing 22nd. He will not make it to Phoenix. Kevin Harvick, you see finishing 17th, the second worst of the 8 finishing playoff drivers. This is now where I think I have to broadly speak a little bit more about the finish of this race and how it played out. So when Chase Elliott took the white flag in today's 500 lap slugfest, Brad Keselowski in 4th and Denny Hamlin in 11th were both 1 point, one single position ahead of Kevin Harvick for the final 2 championship 4 spots. Kevin Harvick, meanwhile, had just snuck into the top 10 and was having a very difficult time trying to run down Kyle Busch for that absolutely necessary final position, because Harvick actually owned the tiebreaker over both Hamlin and Keselowski, so if he'd gotten around Kyle Busch and the other positions had all stayed the same, he would have been fine. Harvick closed the gap quickly on Kyle Busch, but coming out of turn 4, he tried to pass Busch cleanly, went to the inside. Busch gave him the entire bottom lane, but as they came out of turn 4, it became clear that Harvick was not going to have a chance to pass Kyle Busch down the front stretch, so he just hung a right and turned Kyle Busch. You know, I get it. Gotta do what you gotta do, but in the process, Harvick actually wrecked himself, and actually wrecked himself much worse than what ever happened to Kyle Busch. In fact, Kyle Busch didn't even hit the wall. He just 360'd it and then went right across the finish line. Harvick, meanwhile, backed it into the inside safer barrier and was effectively out of the race, fell back to 17th, as you saw just a moment ago. It was absolutely nerve-wracking watching not just that final lap, which was absolutely insane, going to be replayed and talked about for years to come, but the final 100 laps, honestly, were some of the most engaging laps I've seen as a NASCAR fan. Kevin Harvick was in trouble all day long. They unloaded bad. I mean, this was the worst Kevin Harvick had looked all season long. Harvick's put together a fantastic season. 9 wins, an average finish of like 7.1. I mean, these are fantastic numbers. You do not see these numbers every year. But after hitting the wall at Texas and limping to a 16th place run last week, Harvick was somewhat vulnerable coming into today when we looked at the points, and they unloaded terribly. He ran outside the top 20 early on in this race, then some contact with Matt Kenseth, scraping up against each other, racing for position back in the pack. Ended up cutting down Harvick's left to retire. He ended up pitting under green, got a little lucky with a caution. He only went 1 lap down, but then Kevin Harvick spent like the middle 200 laps of this race trying desperately to catch a caution and get back on the lead lap, running 28th, 29th, 30th the whole time, watching guys like Keselowski, Hamlin, Elliott, Truex lead laps. It had to be a helpless feeling for Rodney Childers and Kevin Harvick, knowing how well they'd run all season long. To have it come down really to 2 bad weeks in a row had to be painful. But with 100 laps to go, Harvick got that caution and got the free pass, and he was on a mission. He was even helped by the fact that Brad Keselowski sped on pit road, so both he and Keselowski were right next to each other on the restart. All Kevin Harvick had to do was stay roughly 5 positions behind Brad Keselowski. He didn't even have to stay ahead of Keselowski. He just couldn't let Keselowski get 10 positions ahead of him. He just had to stay within about 5 spots of Brad Keselowski. Unfortunately for Harvick, though, the car just never got that much better throughout the entirety of the race. Early on, of course, he was running 25th. That was pretty bad. By the end of this race, they got him running, close to the top 10. Unfortunately, though, Brad Keselowski was just much better. Keselowski challenged for the lead at a lot of points in this race. He clearly had a top 5 car, which is why he drove back to 4th in the final 60 laps. Kevin Harvick Harvick just could not keep up with Brad Keselowski in the closing laps. And even listening to Kevin Harvick's radio, it was interesting that Rodney Childers and Tim Feedwell, crew chief and spotter for Harvick, were hesitant to relay any important points information to Kevin Harvick. Harvick was really focused. He didn't want to hear it apparently, so they didn't give him much information. Really, there's about 20 or 30 laps there where they didn't give him any points information. And then literally on the white flag lap, Rodney Childers came over the radio and said, hey, we need one more position. You have to get by the 18 car. They'd literally been quiet for like 20 or 30 laps until then. And then finally on the white flag, they're like, oh, you got to knock this guy out of the way, whatever you can do. So it was really interesting to see how the 4 team managed those closing laps, watching their championship hopes slowly slip away as Keselowski got further and further away from them. But honestly, the drama didn't end there because while, I was watching and TV was watching, we were all watching Keselowski gap Harvick and pass a bunch of cars and stuff. Quietly, Denny Hamlin was dropping like a rock. All of a sudden we looked up and Hamlin was only like 3 points to the good. And we're like, oh, he loses like 2 more spots and this is a whole new ball game. And Hamlin kept dropping. And honestly, Denny Hamlin was bailed out by the fact that when he dropped to 11th, the 12th place car was his teammate Erik Jones. And they sort of hinted at this on the broadcast, but I'm surprised Erik Jones raced Hamlin as cleanly as he did. Erik Jones was fired by Joe Gibbs Racing this summer. He is not going to race for Toyota next year. He's going to Richard Petty. In fact, he already has a deal with Richard Petty Motorsports. He's no longer a free agent. I understand it might have been a very awkward week at the shop here, but I'm shocked Erik Jones gave Denny Hamlin as much space as he did because he clearly was backing off the throttle. He was clearly not challenging Denny Hamlin as much as he would have were this a normal situation. So the fact that Denny Hamlin ended up falling into the clutches of his teammate, Erik Jones, a young teammate who still, he has many years of NASCAR racing in his future. He doesn't want to make enemies with anyone right now if he can avoid it. That ultimately is what saved Denny Hamlin because otherwise he was free falling. Guys like Cole Custer, Matt Kenseth were coming fast. He was going to lose multiple spots if Erik Jones just blew right by him. And honestly, then the collapse for Denny Hamlin would have been complete. Hamlin would have been the 5th place guy on the playoff grade, the first one out of the championship 4. So all those storylines swirling around those closing laps, it was absolutely remarkable to watch. Of course, Martinsville's a great racetrack, beating and banging, side by side, bumper to bumper action throughout the field. Martinsville's great. And as it turned to a night race with the newly installed lights at Martinsville, just a completely different atmosphere. There was only about 1,000 fans in the stands, and that is a shame because if this had been a full house like it would usually be this time of year at Martinsville, oh my gosh, you thought the reaction to Matt Kenseth, Joey Logano in 2015 was big? Tonight's reaction actually may not have been quite as big, but it would have been pretty close. I mean, it would have been a raucous crowd with all the storylines happening down the stretch. Something I wish we had seen, unfortunately. But let's focus on Kevin Harvick, because ultimately, with Chase Elliott getting the win and blowing up the playoff grid, so to speak, Chase Elliott, Joey Logano, Brad Keselowski, and Denny Hamlin will be your championship 4 racing for a title at Phoenix in 1 week. And so Kevin Harvick, the guy who put together an all-time great season, is now out of the NASCAR playoffs. And he said it in his post-race interview. These championships are not the same as when Penny and Earnhardt won them. We'll talk a little bit about the playoff format in just a moment, but he's not wrong. Ultimately, it came down to 3 bad races. Really just 2 because he finished second at Kansas a couple weeks ago. But hitting the wall early at Texas, I know the mist and everything came into play there, so that was unfortunate. And then not being able to repair the damage to their liking and ended up finishing 16th at Texas, that put them in a small hole. But today, unloading so terribly, collecting 0 stage points in 1 or 2. They collect 1 stage point in stage 1 or 2. They just get a 10th place finish in one of those stages. This is a completely different conversation, but they dropped the ball in every way imaginable today. They picked the absolute worst day of the year to have their worst race of the season by far. And even though he had so many playoff points coming into this round, it still wasn't quite enough to save him from back-to-back weeks of mediocre performance. This is now the 7th year NASCAR has used some form of the knockout round playoff format. It's only been this current format with the playoff points and everything since 2017. But in the all the 4 or 7 years, however you want to look at it, years of this format, this has to be the most shocking elimination. 9 wins this season. Now, ultimately, his Achilles heel was Martinsville, a track that uses the 750 low downforce rules package. And we've talked about on this show for months at this point that while Kevin Harvick and for much of the year Denny Hamlin have racked up most of the wins, 6 out of Hamlin's 7 wins have come using the 550 package, and 7 of Harvick's 9 wins have come using the 550 horsepower rules package. Neither driver has run particularly great, at least not consistently, at the short tracks. Meanwhile, Brad Keselowski's got 3 wins with the 750 package this year. Today was Chase Elliott's 3rd win of the year with the 750 package. Harvick and Hamlin, while still really good at the short tracks and the 1 mile or less tracks and the road courses, they weren't dominant. They weren't dominant like they were on all the 1.5 mile and bigger tracks this season. So ultimately, was I shocked that Harvick didn't contend for a win today? No, I didn't have Harvick winning today's race. I thought he'd run in the top 5 or top 10, sure, but I didn't think he was going to win. I certainly did not expect him to run 25th for the first half of this race, 2/3 of this race. That was absolutely shocking. I'm going to segue now into talking about the playoffs more broadly, but with this playoff format, while the regular season does matter and success in February does affect your championship hopes in November, with playoff points from stage wins and race wins, what you do in February and March still does matter in November. It mattered today. Despite the fact that the entire season does matter and consistency does help your championship hopes, Harvick did say it best at the end there. It comes down to kind of mini 3-race seasons once you get into the playoffs. Round 1 is 3 races, round 2, 3 races, round 3, 3 races. And if 2 out of those 3 races don't go well for you, it doesn't really matter how many playoff points you have. I mean, today was kind of a perfect storm against Kevin Harvick. If Chase Elliott doesn't win this race, if Blaney or Logano or Keselowski, who finished 2, 3, 4, if one of those guys wins this race, Harvick's in. Harvick would be racing for a championship next week the way the points look right now. But the fact that Chase Elliott is the one who got the win, the fact that Harvick had his worst race, at least through the first 2.5 stages of the season, it took all of those things happening, and Harvick was still only out by 1 point. 1 singular point. It certainly is hard to stomach. I mean, this is going to go down as a great statistical season. His average finish is still in the 7 range. 9 wins on the season is very, very impressive, but it's going to feel a little empty without the championship at the end of the season. Now, I want to talk about the playoff standings because all the debate now is about NASCAR playoffs. Fans have been debating the NASCAR playoffs since I became a fan of the sport in 2004. Obviously, that was the first year the chase was introduced. And I tweeted this midway through the race before we actually knew whether or not Harvick was going to get eliminated or not. I tweeted that, and I stand by this, I think this is the best chase/playoff format NASCAR has had. It's a perfect combination of rewarding consistency throughout the entire season because Denny Hamlin's win in February at the Daytona 500, those 5 playoff points are what got him to the championship for today. So the full season does matter. How you run in February, March, April does affect your championship hopes in November, as we saw today. But it's also a format that does lead to dramatic races like what we saw today. The deeper you get in the playoffs, the more important each individual race is, which is entertaining and engaging for fans watching at home. I was glued to my TV pretty much the entire race today. No one can tell me that was a bad race there, that they were not invested or intrigued by what the outcome was going to be. I mean, we didn't know what was going to happen until literally turn 4 of the final lap when Harvick got into Kyle Busch and it didn't work. So this format with the playoff points and how they carry over from round to round does reward consistency. Not the same way the old 2003 and earlier Winston Cup point standings did. Obviously that was as pure as it gets. I think the chase that was introduced in 2004 was kind of dumb, honestly. The fact that the points reset after 26 races and then the final 10 races were like their own season, I thought that was dumb. I think the way the knockout round format began in 2014 where playoff points didn't exist and there was really no reward for being good in the regular season, I thought the 2014 to 2016 version of this format was dumb. The 2017 to now NASCAR playoff format, I believe, is great. I know some of y'all disagree. Feel free to disagree with me, but I like it. Did NASCAR ever need a playoff system? No. They certainly didn't need to introduce the chase in 2004. I understand why they tried it, but they certainly didn't need to. But I think it's a terrible idea for NASCAR to continue to change the playoff format every few years, because by doing that, you only hurt the series' legitimacy. You need to stick with one format for a significant period of time, because as the competitors learn that this is how it is, this is how you have to perform as new competitors getting into the sport, have a set expectation of how NASCAR is going to work, how they're going to reward a champion. Over time, that format will become the legitimate way of crowning a champion. I think NASCAR's biggest mistake from 2004 to 2017 was changing the format every 3 years, pretty much. I think that was a huge mistake. That made it really difficult for fans to take whatever the newest format is seriously. The way I see it, major sports see huge upsets all the time. I know y'all hate to compare NASCAR to stick and ball sports, and obviously it's not a perfect comparison. Football, basketball, baseball, obviously it's like one-on-one to one team versus one team. Usually NASCAR, it's 1 versus 40 every week. I understand. There's a lot of variables. I get it. I know it's not perfect, but the way I see it, NASCAR's playoff format lends itself very nicely to primetime television. NASCAR said years ago about the playoffs that they want to create more Game 7 moments. I understand the concerns of it feeling too artificially driven, but ultimately the emotions I felt watching tonight's Cup race at Martinsville were not artificial. I was heavily invested in tonight's race. I thought it was incredibly dramatic, whether or not Harvick was going to get the position he needed, whether or not Hamlin was going to stop the slide, whether or not Keselowski was going to continue to move through the top 10, whether Chase Elliott was going to be able to retake the lead and drive off and hide. all those question marks I had with, less than 100 laps to go in this race caused the finish of this race to be one of the most interesting and engaging NASCAR race finishes I have seen as a race fan. Those feelings were not artificial. So it's not perfect. I'm never going to say the current format is 100% foolproof and perfect, but while I know there are going to be many vocal fans, probably many of you in the comments, that are going to be pushing NASCAR to completely overhaul the system next year, NASCAR, don't do it. If you change the format for 2021 or 2022, you're just falling into the same pattern that I think has killed the legitimacy of the playoffs over the last decade and a half. You need to stop changing it every 3 or 4 years. I laid out my argument in favor of the format just a minute ago. I really do hope NASCAR does not jump the shark on this one and feel they need to make some sort of knee-jerk change. I think that would be a bad idea. But that's all I really have to say about the playoff format. This is all very stream of consciousness in the moment, so I don't know, perhaps my opinion could be swayed slightly one way or the other, but I don't know. I think this race was extremely entertaining, and I think this is exactly what NASCAR was hoping for when they introduced this style of NASCAR playoffs. So mission accomplished. I enjoyed the race. Let's put it on the groovy gauge. All discussion of the playoff format aside, this was one of the most interesting NASCAR races I have ever seen. I'm giving it a 100%. Hard racing, comers and goers, typical bump and run, fantastic Martinsville, Chase Elliott's heroic drive the final 60 laps, the drama of watching Kevin Harvick and Brad Keselowski and Denny Hamlin there in the closing laps, all of that combined made this one of the most engaging NASCAR races I have ever seen. I am giving it a 100%. It was fantastic. I will remember this race years from now, and I'm sure many of you watching at home will remember it as well. Maybe not all of you for good reasons. I'm sure there are many people who are very frustrated. I'm sure there are a lot of Harvick fans especially who are very, very frustrated with how this season has ultimately played out. But to me, this race generated a ton of storylines, and that's ultimately what NASCAR is going for. Let me know what you guys thought if you haven't already. I'm sure many of you already left comments. Let me know what you thought of tonight's Xfinity 500. That's confusing. The Xfinity 500, but it's a NASCAR Cup Series race at Martinsville. Let's just say NASCAR moving Martinsville to the cutoff race, the semifinal race of the season, was a great decision. That was awesome. Credit to everyone who made that happen. It was a short week, so credit to all the teams, all the people who work at NASCAR, the officials, the track, everyone for making this weekend happen. The schedule really didn't get changed. The Texas Cup race ended Wednesday night. Trucks were racing Friday night, Xfinity yesterday, Cup Day. Credit to everyone for working really hard the last few days to keep the schedule on track as much as possible. That's all I've got for tonight's episode. We'll do videos this week, of course, talking all about the Championship 4, previewing Phoenix, discussing who the favorites are, who the underdogs are. Really exciting group of drivers. Like I said, the first Chevy driver in the Championship 4 in 4 years. So a lot of people are going to be riding Chase Elliott this week, I am sure. But that's all I've got. Thank you all for watching. Be sure to subscribe if you are new to the channel. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, a tremendous thank you to my fantastic Patreon supporters. I couldn't do this show without your support each and every month. I greatly appreciate it. And a big thank you again to Modari Toys, makers of the NASCAR track set. You can get your own just in time for the holidays. Links are down in the description. Big thank you to them for sponsoring this episode of Out of the Groove. But that is all I've got. I hope everyone has a fantastic weekend. We'll be back at it bright and early this week with a lot more discussion after Martinsville, previewing the Championship 4. There's a lot to talk about here in the coming days. Thank you for the support. I will see you very, very soon.